quick video to give you my thoughts and potential prediction for Anthony Joshua against Alexander Povetkin. Now, I've been a long-time boxing fan, a huge fan of Hatman, Dwyer, IFL TV. Watch these guys pretty much every day, read Boxing Scene every day, Ring TV, and then watch boxing every weekend. So, by no means an expert, and I wouldn't call myself a boxing connoisseur, but I love the sport through and through. I'm going to keep this fairly brief. I think this is one of these matches that Anthony Joshua is in a bit of a no-win situation. For one reason or another, and weirdly I share this opinion even though I know it's not true, our perception of Alexander Povetkin is that he's good, but he's not really a huge test. And I think this is primarily because we've seen him being beaten by Vladimir Klitschko quite a while ago now, but beating comprehensively and didn't really trouble Klitschko a whole lot. Now, for anyone that's seen that fight, I wouldn't encourage you to run away and watch it. You can watch maybe 2 rounds and you've pretty much seen the whole dynamic of the fight. A lot of jabbing, a lot of grabbing, pretty much what Klitschko became famous for. And regardless of his style, you know, he drew huge crowds in Germany and the surrounding areas. And they seemed to enjoy that. As long as he was winning, they didn't really care how. But I think Povetkin is underrated. Absolutely underrated. I think he hits much harder than we give him credit for. I appreciate the win against Pricey is credited a little bit because he got chinned himself. I don't think he was hurt as badly as the commentators were kind of getting all excited about. I think it was more of a balance issue. You know, it was a legitimate knockdown because the ropes probably did keep him up, but I think he was falling over more from a loss of balance than kind of a lack of coherence. But it did show that he does have defensive vulnerabilities, though I think he has a chin that you aren't going to dent very easily. I appreciate he went down against Klitschko a couple times, but I don't think he was ever seriously hurt. Fantastic athlete. He can fight 12 rounds. He's short, he's squat. Thing is that Joshua hasn't really fought anyone with a similar kind of height and reach dynamic. So this will be something new for him. I think it actually has come at the right time as Joshua is transitioning away from this step forward and throw as many and as hard as he can into more of a kind of boxer, kind of punching and moving kind of style. It's weird how boxers, especially at heavyweight, kind of follow this transition. I think Tyson Fury followed it. Initially, again, he was very front foot heavy, swinging wildly, uppercutting himself. We've all seen that video. I'm a huge fan of Fury, by the way. Just having fun. Klitschko did the same thing. Look at him in his early rounds, getting KO'd by everyone, not by everyone, but being put down hard and out cold in some cases. And as he transitioned, I guess it was Emmanuel Stewart that kind of put him down that path. But as I said, Fury took a very similar route, and Joshua is now taking a similar route. And I think the Povetkin fight is probably maybe 1 or 2 fights earlier than I think a promoter like Eddie Hearn would have liked. Give him a bit more chance, a bit more practice to kind of get used to this range style working behind a jab. I do think, however, that Povetkin is going to have to chase the fight. And I mean, look at Joshua's fights. He loves to be chased, and he's in love, but he much rather somebody come to him than him having to go after the fight. He looked he looked ineffective against Parker. He was clearly unaccustomed to that level of movement, because it's strange to see that at a heavyweight. You know, you don't see a boxer moving that much. I think Parker, if he was a little less negative and a little more self-belief, he could have done a bit more in that fight. But I do think that Anthony Joshua was making it very difficult for him. Now, there's a reason why boxers are low volume, who are usually quite high volume. It's not because they're scared, it's because they're unable to land without getting caught themselves. You know, and I think you can see this time and time again in a lot of fights, and it's often put down to, oh, they had a bad night. I don't think boxers necessarily have bad nights. I think they have bad opponents. And I think that Parker was a bad opponent for AJ. He didn't look particularly great. Takam was a similar kind of nature, actually. I mean, I don't think we're used to seeing Takam on the back foot either. He did, you know, not quite as well as Parker, but, you know, he did well. Stop was probably premature. But regardless of that, I do think that Joshua will take care of business against Povetkin. I can't see this ending anything other than a knockout. That's not to say that I don't think Povetkin doesn't have a puncher's chance. I think there's some subtleties in Anthony Joshua's body language and his disposition that to me suggests he's not really in the happiest of places. I think he's a little bit frustrated that he didn't get the Wilder fight. He just came out of a kind of a press conference and kind of like a, you know, where they do like the press kind of sparring or the press kind of pad work, and it was again very, very short, which is unlike Joshua. He still did all the kind of signing and the signature stuff. You know, he's always dedicating a lot of his time to the fans, but yeah, the pad work seemed uncharacteristically short. I wonder if he's just getting a little bit bored, a little bit sick and tired of it all. I imagine these things are far more attractive and novel when you're chasing huge amounts of money, but I imagine that when you've made large amounts of money, the desire and the need maybe fade away somewhat. And I think actually Joshua made reference to that in an interview with IFL TV. But it's no longer about the money, you know, he's already rich enough to retire. It's about legacy and about putting on impressive fights. And the public didn't want Povetkin. And it's a shame because, as I said, Povetkin is a fantastic fighter. And I think it will be an interesting fight. I think it'll be a good learning experience for Joshua. And I wouldn't be surprised if Povetkin wins. It's unfortunate that we all have this shared view, I said myself included, of Povetkin. But it's not true. I know it isn't true. I know he's a good fighter. I mean, it's not impossible that we go into round one, Joshua lands some kind of straight right, puts him down, and it's over in a round. And people will say, well, Povetkin was always terrible. But that might happen, but it doesn't mean that Povetkin's a terrible fighter. You don't win gold medal in the Olympics if you're a terrible fighter. I'm sure there's at least one or two people who've just heard that and said, well, Joshua shouldn't have won anyway. Agreed, but he's still not a terrible fighter because of it. I think that, you know, if Povetkin is going to win this fight, and I think it's entirely possible. He just needs to keep tucked up the first 4 or 5 rounds. And Anthony Joshua has this very kind of proven track record of going almost limp-like in the kind of middle to early late rounds. Like he just seems to lose his cohesion, his legs seem to go, and he just seems to be dead on his feet. And I imagine then through a combination of determination and, you know, training, he gets a second win and he finishes really, really strong. I think if Povetkin's going to win, he has to nail him in that kind of middle point before Joshua gets a second wind. I'm curious to see how it plays out. If I was Povetkin, I would be almost, I know he never fights in the back foot, but we've seen how ineffective Joshua is chasing someone, running away from him, or not running away, but, you know, backpedaling. If I was Povetkin, I wouldn't be trying to force the issue. I'd be turtling up, absorbing Joshua for the first 5-6 rounds, not trying to win on points, just trying to catch him in that lull he has, and just loading the whole gun on him and see what happens. I think that's his best chance. I don't know whether he's going to employ that. He might be on Joshua from round 1, which I think honestly would be a huge mistake. Joshua is nothing but power in those early rounds. He's so dangerous. I mean, he hits like an absolute truck. I don't think he hits as hard as Deontay Wilder, but he definitely has power. And, you know, people will point to the Parker fight and the Takam. I know Takam wasn't a knockout win, but it's far easier to knock somebody out who's stepping to you than somebody who's stepping away from you. You know, you don't need to be a boxer or a genius to know that. But Povetkin, if he's going to step forward, I think he needs to be very, very careful. I would definitely encourage him, and maybe this is what they've trained for, encourage to be patient, wait. Don't worry about the points, don't worry about the scorecards, don't worry about the fans booing because you're throwing no punches. And I don't want him to fight negative. I want him to come out all guns blazing, Joshua to come out guns blazing, and, you know, somebody's going to end up on the deck. But I think if he's going to win, that's his road to victory. All Joshua really has to do is stick behind a jab, keep it long, and don't get drawn into Povetkin's fight. I do wonder if Joshua's going to get sucked in by the crowd a little bit and will be quite eager to please. I mean, he has a come-forward fighter, so he doesn't really have an excuse for not providing a spectacular knockout that we've come to associate him with. And again, that's unfair because Povetkin is an elite heavyweight. I mean, he really is. He's elite. I mean, look at the size of Povetkin in comparison. If you look at the press conference today, comparatively speaking, he's a much, much smaller man, but he looks lean. I mean, look how chiseled his jaw looks. There's no fat there. He looks very healthy. He looks very determined. I think this is likely to be his most successful and effective camp. Povetkin, I mean. And I think he'll be like a coiled spring waiting to detonate on Joshua. And there's a lot of Joshua to hit, remember. I wonder, how you might find Povetkin digging into the body. But I think that, as I said, Joshua has already started to kind of move towards this kind of fighting at range style. And I think that the Povetkin fight will be a good test to see how far along the kind of road to forming that style he is. Expect to see a truckload of jabs from AJ, a lot of straight rights, maybe stepping in with a cheeky kind of right hook. I don't know. We'll see. I'm curious to see it. It's a great card, actually. I mean, for anyone that kind of a box. And there's something, when we say boxing casuals are the ones that generate all the money in boxing. The kind of big, huge pay-per-views. It all comes from the casual boxing fans. But for those of the more hardcore, I think we're all looking at the Matty Askin and Lawrence. Okay, I don't want to butcher his second name, Okoli. I'm going to go for Okoli. I maybe make a separate video on that because I think that's a great fight. But I think there's a clear winner there. We'll see. Anyway, I'll wrap this up here. Thanks for tuning in, folks, and I'll see you again soon.